The day has settled into that deep, quiet rhythm that precedes the real work. The intense glow of the forge is banked down now, reduced to a bed of smoldering coals and cooling ash. You pull back on your heavy wool tunic, feeling the fine grit of soot still dusting beneath the elbow creases. A profound sense of physical tiredness washes over you, not an exhaustion that demands rest, but a deep, settling weariness in the bones, like wood that has been bowed by sustained heat. The air here smells fundamentally different from morning, no longer sharp with newly stoked fire and coal dust, but mellowed, carrying the deeper, earthy scent of spent ash mixed with stale sweat and the faint resin tang of damp oak. You stand for a long moment in the cooling expanse of the forge floor, letting your breathing sink with the fading heat radiating up through the stone flagstones beneath your boots. The sounds are mostly low and intermittent, the soft, gentle crackle of embers sighing into silence, the occasional settling thunk as metal cools entirely, the distant call of a gull or perhaps just the cry of a hungry crow circling above the village roofs. You take several slow breaths, inhaling the cool air that has managed to creep back into your workspace. This clean breath feels weighty, scrubbed clean of smoke and effort. You notice how the low winter sun, now beginning its descent, casts long, pale streaks across the rough stone walls surrounding the forge. These lines of light seem almost liquid, shifting and thinning as the earth begins its quiet tilt toward evening. It is a reminder that the fire, though fundamental to your life here, is entirely dependent on this enormous, slow cycle of solar energy. The process of cooling metal holds a unique stillness. You move away from the main anvil, picking up a discarded piece of scrap iron, a jagged shard that was too small or imperfect for active reshaping earlier today. You observe it in the falling light. The surface is dull now, matte black where the heat has evaporated any shine. It feels cool and heavy in your palm, a solid counterpoint to the lingering warmth you remember from the glowing coals. This moment of handling cooling metal is different from working hot. It requires patience, allowing the peacetime to stabilize in your grip before assessment. Your mind wanders over the journey of that shard. It began deep within the earth, encased by rock and mineral veins, requiring enormous pressure and heat over millennia to be formed. Then men, ancestors whose faces you would never see but whose skills inform your own actions, had to cleave it free, drag it back to a primitive bloomery hearth, smelt it with charcoal fires, hammer it into usable ingots. And now, here it is in your hands, having passed through the same fundamental process of purification, fire and force. This reflection prompts you to move methodically around the workspace. You notice tools that were set down earlier, the array of folding tongs, damp and coated with an oily residue, the whetstones, stacked neatly near a small basin filled with water for dipping, the heavy bellows resting against the wall, their leather covers creased by countless breaths. You lift one of these implements, perhaps a pair of tongs. You examine the joints, running your thumb over the iron structure. They are functional, built to endure repeated extreme stresses, sudden drops, intense heat cycles, abrasive impacts. There is no decorative aspect to them. Their beauty lies purely in their engineering integrity. Every curve and joint serves a specific purpose, resisting torsion when lifting superheated blooms, maintaining shape against gravity. It brings you to the necessary maintenance ritual. You gather a small pile of fine soot residue and use an oiled rag to wipe down the workbench surface. The cloth picks up the black dust easily, releasing that sharp, slightly acrid smell unique to burnt hydrocarbons mixed with mineral oxides. As you work, your focus shrinks entirely to the texture under your fingertips, the gritty resistance of the stone, the slick smoothness of old oil on metal, the porous sponginess of charcoal ash. The sounds return softly, drawing you back into the immediate physicality of the moment. The rhythmic drip-drip of water from an eaves trough outside. A slight scraping sound as your foot nudges a pile of kindling wood against stone. The gentle rustle of dry leaves stirred by a cooling evening breeze passing through the yard. You find yourself performing small, almost automatic tasks. You begin to stack scrap metal pieces back into their designated area, creating neat little drifts of usable raw material. This sorting is not urgent, but it anchors you in the present moment. It is an act of inventory, confirming that nothing useful is lost and everything necessary for tomorrow is accounted for. The air temperature begins its noticeable drop. The comforting wall of warmth provided by the forge slowly retracts, allowing the true chill of the coming night to filter into the open workyard. You pull your shawl tighter around your shoulders, adjusting the weight and texture against your neck and chest. This gradual change in comfort demands attention. It makes you acutely aware of the layers of wool and linen that protect you from the vast indifference of the outer air. You consider the cycle of heat loss. The coals themselves are slowly returning to a stable state, cooling down into manageable embers. Yet they hold enough residual heat to continue giving off warmth for hours, a banked energy waiting for the morning's revival. It teaches you something about persistence, that even after intense work, vital resources do not vanish instantly. They diminish slowly, providing comfort long after the main effort has ceased. This quiet observation naturally draws your mind toward preparation for tomorrow's materials. You walk over to a shelf where different types of metal and wood are stored. There are chunks of softer iron ore awaiting smelting, rough bundles of dry oak split into kindling sizes, and several bags of charcoal that have been carefully piled in the corner of the workshop. You run your fingers across one of the smooth, weighty stones, a large grinding whetstone used for shaping tools or polishing finished edges. The stone is cool to the touch, absorbing the ambient chill. It feels geological, ancient, unaffected by the quick passes of human effort or the heat of a single day's labor. Thinking of such permanence prompts you into a quiet contemplation about time itself, measured differently here than in structured society. Time is not merely a progression from sunup to sundown. It is cyclical material. It is represented by the charcoal turning to ash and then reforming as kindling, by the metal being softened by fire only to be hardened by rapid cooling, by the deep freeze of winter followed by the lush life promised by spring. The profound solitude of the end of the working day allows these thoughts space to gather, undisturbed. You are a keeper of heat, a mediator between raw earth and functional tool. The act of shaping metal is not just manual labor. It is an interaction with elemental forces, fire for transformation, and stone for resistance. Your body moves toward a quieter task, fetching water. You move through the village passage toward the nearest stream or public fountain area near your dwelling. The shift in environment is immediate. The scent of the concentrated forge gives way to the clean, cool smell of fresh running water, mixed with the faint vegetal decay and damp earth smell unique to riverbanks. Sunlight now grazes across the wet stones and banks, scattering small glints of light that look deceptively fragile. You observe the stream itself. The water flows consistently, always carrying some sort of visible particulate, small pebbles, bits of leaf litter, sediment from upstream. It is a steady, inexorable force, whispering over smoothed river stones. You kneel by the edge, placing your cupped hands beneath the flow. The coldness penetrates immediately through the skin, grounding you fully into the present moment and the immediate temperature reality. You scoop up water in a large wooden bucket, feeling the satisfying weight of it as it fills. This routine action, drawing clean water, is more than just hydration. It is a resetting of your physical boundaries at the close of labor. The taste of this cool, fresh stream water is utterly different from anything stored or boiled. It carries the pure, untainted mineral echo of the earth. The quiet rhythm of the village as dusk gathers feels immense. You hear voices now, the muted sounds of people gathering in their homes, perhaps laughter carried on a mild wind, the rhythmic creak of wooden shutters being closed across the street. These ambient noises are not demanding your attention. They simply exist, forming the backdrop to your slow return toward personal stillness. You carry the filled bucket back to the outer edge of your home area, the weight settling comfortably in your arms. You pour the water into a wash basin set aside near your doorway. The sound of the water hitting the stone basin is sharp and clear, momentarily dominating the quiet sounds around you. This final, cleansing ritual washes away not only the soot from your hands, but seems to rinse away the accumulated grit of physical labor. You stand there for a moment longer, looking at your reflection in the disturbed surface of the pool. A slightly tired, resilient face framed by work-roughened hair and bearing the faint, permanent shadow beneath the eyes that speaks of early rising. The day's intense conversation with heat is over. Now begins the slow process of internal settlement, preparing you for sleep within this ancient, structured world. You leave the shelter, stepping out into the crisp air that still holds the damp chill of morning. The ground beneath your feet is uneven, packed earth mixed with grit and scattered pine needles. The scent of wet ash and old smoke follows you, a familiar perfume of labor. You walk toward the forge area, where even now the residual heat seems to warm the nearby stones. This movement itself requires slow intention. You do not stride, but rather adjust your weight from one foot to the next, feeling the slight give in the earth underfoot. The first things you attend to are the embers themselves. They are no longer glowing fiercely, having cooled slightly overnight into a deep, settling crimson and dull orange. You kneel near the hearth, brushing away the powdery residue of yesterday's fire using a stiff piece of scrap leather. The act is one of meticulous cleanup, focusing on the cool textures, the roughness of the stones beneath your knees, the fine grit that clings to the heel of your hand, the subtle difference in color between old slag and freshly cleaned soot. The hearth itself is built from large, rough-cut fieldstones, stacked imperfectly over time. You run your knuckles along a particularly blackened stone, feeling the gritty texture ingrained deep into its pores. It takes effort to keep this space pure, this heart of the workshop, not merely functional but respectful. This deep cleaning feels less like maintenance and more like preparing a receiving chamber for fire itself. You look at the scrap metal scattered nearby, jagged pieces of discarded bloom iron, fragments of tools that failed their life cycle here. You gather them in piles. Some are soft, flaky remnants, others hold the sharp memory of purpose, edges still crisp from forming. Sorting this refuse requires patience, a quiet sorting through potential waste and forgotten potential. Each piece tells a story of heat and stress, a moment where something was given form by force. The deep trough for charcoal is cool to the touch, smelling strongly of banked earth and dying wood smoke. You select chunks of dry oak and beechwood that have been carefully stacked beside the pit, readying them for the slow, steady burn. These pieces are not simply fuel. They represent stored time, potential energy waiting for a trigger. You arrange them with practiced care, ensuring air can circulate around all sides, a small geometry built from necessity. Your hands begin the gentle work of preparing the tools that will mediate the heat and the material. You fetch a set of tongs from their designated hook. They are heavy, cool iron, and when you lift them, they feel weighted with years of handling. You wipe the grime from the jaws, not scrubbing aggressively, but passing a damp cloth over the surface until the metal achieves a dull sheen again. This gentle care suggests that these objects are extensions of your own body, trusted partners in work. The bellows stand ready nearby, its leather casing dry and stiff. You check the draw-hole valve, ensuring it moves smoothly when you press upon it. The smell of cured leather mixes with the faint, earthy scent of smoke settling around you. To prepare these implements is to think about force exerted gently, the sustained push of air needed to transform mere embers into glowing heart. As the light outside begins to shift, casting long, cool shadows across the earthen floor, your mind drifts back to the fundamental nature of fire. It is a terrifying, beautiful thing. You observe how easily it consumes and how fundamentally it creates. It takes what was solid, wood, charcoal, iron ore, and uses pure heat to transform its very essence. This knowledge settles upon you like a low hum of recognition. The village sleeps in the hush that only comes before true labor begins, but for you, the quiet is merely anticipation. You move over to the edge of the workshop and find a basin of cool, clean water left from another person's morning wash. Dipping your hands into it, you feel the immediate, stark contrast of temperature, the initial shock quickly replaced by a calming coldness. Washing away the dust and residue of your own bedding, your skin feels temporarily purified, grounded in the simple physics of temperature change. You lift your gaze from the cooling hearth to the outer world. The charcoal fire awaits its beginning, patiently banked beneath ash. You know the ritual. The gathering of kindling must be perfect, dry enough not to weep moisture, yet fibrous enough to catch and hold the nascent flame. This preparation is a quiet meditation on slow escalation. Not a sudden burst, but a gentle building, like breath drawn in deep before speaking a long truth. You take one last moment simply standing still, inhaling the composite aroma of wood smoke, damp earth, cool water, and stored metal, the signature scent of your life's rhythm. This sensory tapestry settles over you, reminding you that everything valuable here is predicated on patience, observation, and the ancient understanding of elemental change. The heat remains a deep, abiding presence in the forge, a low, thrumming vibration that seems to live not just within the iron, but within the very earth beneath your feet. You are no longer focused on generating heat. You are learning to read it, to understand its decay and renewal. The initial rush of furnace fire has settled into a profound, steady state. Your attention shifts from the fierce, visible blaze to the quiet aftermath, the pool of cooling embers and the scattered heap of ash near the hearth's edge. You begin by sweeping away the thick layer of soot that coats the stone floor, brushing the gritty residue into a discarded pile outside the main work area. The smell is complex now, less of sharp smoke and more of baked earth mixed with spent charcoal, a scent that speaks of slow time passing. As you methodically clear the debris, your movement becomes almost ritualistic, each sweep a quiet acknowledgement of the cycles of use and rest. You pause near the cooling ingots stacked on low shelves. Their surfaces are coated in a fine, reddish-gray patina, still radiating warmth to the touch if you dare risk it. You gently wipe away the heaviest accumulation of grime from a set of tongs, feeling the slight resistance of cooled mineral deposits against the iron. This quiet act of cleaning forces your focus entirely onto texture. The rough grain of the volcanic stone floor beneath your worn leather shoes, the cool slickness of the metal, and the dry powder that falls through your fingers like ancient dust. Looking at the tools, you perceive them as extensions of yourself. The heavy hammer head, smoothed by decades of impact, the bellows handle, oiled smooth by countless breaths. They are objects defined not by their initial strength, but by the history impressed upon them. You run a thumb over the blackened shaft of the largest anvil tool and notice minute dents, ripples in the metal that correspond to different rhythms of work, a quick tapping for detail, a deep ring for shaping bulk. Each imperfection is a chapter in the life of the smithy. The inherent nature of fire you observe in this lull is control. It is pure energy, terrifying and beautiful, yet it must be housed and directed by human will. You understand that even when everything seems to cool and settle, when the brilliant orange glow shrinks back into a dull red ember, the potential remains coiled within the structure. This meditation on controlled intensity steadies your nerves, making the remaining work feel less like struggle and more like partnership. The time spent contemplating these cooled materials and the settled ash naturally calls for cleansing. The air inside the smithy, rich with metallic particles and wood smoke, is intensely focused. It holds too much history and heat to simply breathe out. You move slowly toward a larger basin set in the corner, meant for mixing molds and washing implements. Here, the water waits. It has been drawn earlier, carrying the clean, bracing chill of the nearby stream. You gather your hands into the basin, letting the cool, pure flow wash over them. The temperature shock is a momentary distraction, sharp and grounding. You pay close attention to the way the cold liquid strips away the fine dust from beneath your fingernails, revealing skin that feels suddenly much more sensitive. This physical cleansing serves as a mental demarcation. It washes away the lingering taste of hot coal and mineral oil, resetting your senses. The mind begins its slow drift outward. You recall the distant sound of running water, the constant murmur of the village stream, a sound that remains unaltered by human toil or time passing. The steady, reliable rhythm of the river is a kind of natural clock, far less demanding than the aggressive pulse of the forge. Stepping away from the contained heat and grime, you venture toward the small trough positioned near the edge of your workspace, designed for cooling tools in large amounts of fresh water. The cold hits your skin fully this time, a vast contrast to the heat-hazed air. You dip a set of tongs into the rushing flow, observing how the water dances around the metalwork, carrying away residual warmth and any mineral impurities. The act is simple, letting objects meet the elemental purity of the stream. You lift them out carefully. They drip slowly, the rivulets tracing patterns on your palms. This connection to the flowing water deepens your sense of being rooted in cycles. Where the forge deals in transformation by violence and heat, by breaking down solid matter through extreme force, the stream demonstrates persistence through gentle motion. The stones at the bottom of the channel, worn smooth by countless years of passage, whisper a lesson in patience far more profound than any hammered law. You watch how the water pools momentarily against a submerged rock before cresting over it, repeating the action tirelessly, always moving forward. You carry the bowl back inside, the clinking sound of the ceramic against the stone floor feeling strangely resonant after the constant ringing chime of your work tools. The coolness permeates your clothes slightly, settling deep into the fibers of your woolen tunic. You are calmer now. The mind has shed the restless energy accumulated by the day's heat and labor. A subtle philosophical current runs through this physical ritual. You understand that all great strength, be it iron or life itself, is composed of alternating states. There is the aggressive fire, yes, but equally vital is the gentle, cool rinse, the deliberate pause for examination. The blacksmith's craft demands not only immense heat and striking power, but an equal measure of quiet observation to read the metal's response, and a clean space, physical and mental, to execute the next perfect motion. The late afternoon light begins to filter through the smoky window embrasure, casting long, uneven shafts onto the dirt floor. The red glow from the cooling furnace is visible now, deep coals beneath layers of soot. You draw a breath that feels cleaner than any you took near the flames, inhaling the layered smells. The damp earth mixed with river silt, overlaid by the faint, comforting metallic ghost of the forge's activity. Settling back into the familiar routine, grounded by the cool water and the sight of settled ash, you feel yourself drawing inward, preparing for the powerful rhythm that awaits when you finally must dance with true, sustained heat once more. The smoke settles slowly, a curtain of gray against the pale afternoon sky. You pause near the anvil's edge, letting the rhythm of your earlier work recede from your awareness. Your hands rest on the smooth, worn wood of the workbench, noticing how the grain patterns are deepened by years of sweat and oil. The forge has cooled somewhat, shifting its intense heat into a manageable radiating warmth that warms your lower back. You begin the process of tidying up, a meditative act that serves as both maintenance and reflection. You gather the spent coals from the hearth, letting them cool in the deep ash bed. It is not the fiery glow you observe now, but the remnants. Dull orange spots slowly fading to gray cinder. The smell here changes too. It loses the sharp, metallic scent of active heat and takes on a dusty, earthy undertone mixed with spent wood smoke. You notice the fine, almost invisible layers of soot coating everything. The anvil's raised surface, the side of the tongs, even your own rough-spun tunic. You pick up a piece of scrap iron, a bloom that was too thin or oddly shaped for immediate use. Its surface is pitted and dark with oxidation. You turn it over in your fingers, feeling the cool, rough weight of it against your palm. This small, imperfect shard represents countless hours of heat and hammer blow, an object given purpose only by the act of reshaping. It prompts a quiet thought about potential, how much inherent value lies within something that is merely scrap. The answer, you feel, is everything. Next, your attention shifts to the tools themselves. You use a stiff-bristled brush to scrape residual soot from the jaws of the tongs. There are flakes of oxidized metal and bits of glassy slag mixed with charcoal dust under the surface grime. Each scraping motion is precise, careful not to damage the temper or shape of the steel. As you work, you observe how different materials interact. The dry powder of ash clinging to your damp skin, the smooth resilience of oiled hardwood, the gritty texture of burnt clay. You find a small basin filled with water near the wash area. You do not use it for washing away sweat or dirt yet, but simply dip your fingertips into the clean, cold liquid. The shock of the pure temperature against your skin is grounding, pulling you instantly back to the present moment and away from the heat-induced haze of concentration. You watch the water run off your fingers, carrying away tiny specks of rust and smoke residue. This slow handling of materials brings forth a deep observation about time. The metal itself seems deeply connected to this passage. When you smooth the edge of a whetstone, its surface is porous and marked by countless strokes. You realize that history, much like the stone under your hands, is not one single clean face, but an accumulation of wear, polish, and imperfection. Every nix and score mark tells a tale of purpose fulfilled. The scent profile becomes more distinct now. It is no longer just smoke, nor merely iron. It is complex, layered with the smell of damp charcoal, the faint sweetness of cooling ash, the sharp tang of oxidized blood-red iron, and the cool, almost mineral smell coming from the stream water nearby. These overlapping scents define your space, defining your life. You move toward a pile of raw ore, small veins of hematite or maybe a patch of porous bog iron you have collected previously. You run your thumb over the rock. It is heavy and cold, holding nothing yet but its own mineral weight. You think about the long journey this material must take. First mined from deep earth, exposed to air and rain, then brought here, subjected to fire, hammered into form until it achieves a hard, usable purpose. The focus shifts entirely to organization. You stack the rough iron blooms neatly in designated areas, grouping similar materials, the pliable bloom metal versus the harder, more structured castings. This task is surprisingly restful for the mind, demanding patience and an eye for detail. You notice how the light, filtering through the smoke-stained window slits, catches the edges of these raw metals, giving them a dull, expectant gleam. When you are finished arranging the materials, you feel the deep fatigue in your forearms, the ache that comes not from sudden exhaustion, but from sustained, rhythmic effort. You rest back against the workbench, letting out a slow breath that plumes slightly in the cool air. The silence now is rich with subtle sounds, the occasional tick of cooling metal contracting, the soft pop of residual ash settling into the floor grit, the distant croaking chorus of frogs from the stream outside. The blacksmith's life is defined by these transitions, these moments of necessary pause. It is in cleaning and observing that the deepest understanding of your craft resides. The raw materials wait for you, silent but pregnant with potential energy. You feel grounded by this cool, tactile reality, the gritty texture of the stone beneath your elbow, the slight coolness radiating from the damp tools, the measured silence that precedes the next work. This stillness is not an end. It is merely a necessary collection of strength before the cycle must begin again. The sun has climbed high now, casting defined and sharply contrasting patches of light across the packed earth of the village lane. You leave the main workshop area behind you, walking slowly, your bare feet tracing the familiar pattern of worn cobblestones and compacted dirt. The movement is unhurried, each step a quiet punctuation mark in the rhythm of the midday village pulse. There is no grand rush here, only the steady, organic beat of people moving between their labors. You notice how the heat trapped by the surrounding buildings has risen up to meet you, giving the air a distinct weight that presses gently against your skin. It smells of wood smoke mixed with damp earth and the faint, sharp tang of cooking smoke from the houses nearby. The ringing in your ears, a faint buzz of warmth, still clings to the edges of your awareness. Though the fire has settled into glowing patience and deep slumber within the forge basin, you do not rush away from it. Instead, you let the residual heat guide your movements. You know that while metal demands intense energy, its supporting structures demand quiet attention. A day spent shaping iron leaves would weary, splintered, and needing care itself. You turn your attention away from the glow of the cooling coals toward the corner stacks where your implements rest. The smell here is different, a dry, faintly pungent mix of linseed oil, cured leather, and fresh timber. It is a scent that speaks of slow growth and patient crafting. You select a pile of handles, these grips for tongs or perhaps small smoothing chisels that have acquired an uneven nap of soot and splintered wood during the day's heat. They feel dry and porous beneath your fingertips. You retrieve a block of coarse sandstone, one used traditionally for smoothing work on bone and grip material, which is cooler to the touch than any stone near the fire pit. You take up a flat piece of scrap sander stone and begin the meticulous process of sanding. You move slowly across the length of the handle, applying gentle, steady pressure. The first passes feel rough, catching against ingrained soot and tiny flakes of oxidized metal residue. Each sweep reveals a subtle change in texture, the deep, matte grain of the oak taking on a silky smoothness. It is a sound that requires focus, a low, rhythmic shushing whisper against the stone. You stop every few smooth passes to close your eyes briefly. Your fingers trace the shape of the handle in the fading light. You are not thinking of speed or efficiency. You are simply paying attention to the substance. Notice how the wood grain pattern becomes visible, rising through the sanding action. A map of rings and years that held moisture and life before it was shaped into a tool grip. This focused observation slows your breathing, making each exhalation longer, deeper. A corner draws your eye next, a small workbench leg crafted from a stout section of elm. Weeks ago, an accidental force, perhaps a falling piece of debris or the rough impact of setting down heavy bloom iron, had caused a deep, jagged crack near its joint. It is not structurally compromised enough to discard entirely, but it requires attention if you wish it to bear weight again. You kneel beside it and examine the fault line. The split edges are sharp, brittle, and slightly dusty. Repairing this piece is not merely about making it whole. It is about respecting its history of stress. You fetch a small block of tough sinew and some dry, thick-cut wood glue made from rendered animal fat mixed with binding fibers. You carefully wedge the tacky mix into the visible fissures, working it deep into the heart of the split until the seam is visibly packed and sealed. The smell here is earthy and slightly ammoniac, the scent of curing adhesive mingled with old sap. Moving to the edge of your workspace, you encounter a stack of fallen oak branches, gathered perhaps by a younger family member. These are not for kindling yet. They are too thick, bearing the promise of future fuel. Their texture is robust and slightly uneven. You select 3 pieces that have split naturally along their length due to drying over the past seasons. Taking your sharpest splitting wedge, you methodically chip away at the natural cleavage lines. The goal is not clean cuts, but rather coaxing the wood to obey its own structural weakness. Each careful tap of the mallet against the wedge head produces a satisfying thwack, followed by the delicate tear and separation of seasoned wood fibers. You observe the resulting curls of wood, those long, feather-light slivers that fall at your feet. They are beautiful in their randomness, testament to the internal pressures built up within the heartwood over decades. You pause to gather these pieces into a neat pile. They require no heat, only gentle pressure and time. The rhythmic action of splitting and sanding creates a profound contrast with the constant violence of the forge. When you hammer iron, the purpose is immediate, transformation via force. When you shape wood, the process relies on understanding resistance, the slow parting of fibers, the steady work of friction. It feels almost academic in its patience. You notice how different woods react to the same gentle handling. The oak offers a dense, fibrous structure that accepts sanding with persistent grain lines. It gives deep and satisfying smell. The elm, being tougher and more unpredictable, requires measured wedges and slow gluing. This variety of response makes you contemplate material memory, how every piece of wood carries within itself the knowledge of where it grew, how much rain it drank, and how many years it faced the sun. The workbench leg is finally cured, resting securely against a stack of newly split kindling. The sanded handles gleam faintly in the deepening twilight, reflecting the weak orange glow still lingering near the embers. You look at the scattered debris, smooth sander stones, chunks of seasoned wood, and perfectly separated fuel pieces. It is not the dramatic fire that defines your day, but this accumulated quiet work, the measured effort applied to things meant to support the great energy of transformation. This methodical attention to the secondary materials allows a kind of deep centering, preparing both the tools and your own mind for the coming stillness of night. The afternoon light begins its steady slide, softening the sharp edges of your day's labors. You find yourself drawn away from the immediate glow of the forge's heart, standing instead near the cool periphery, where the banked embers settle into a uniform blanket of gray ash. The heat that had been an active force in your limbs now becomes a deep, radiating warmth beneath your boots. You watch this slow cooling process with an unhurried eye. It is not the fire you observe, but the quiet work of its departure. There is a particular kind of calm that settles into the space between the blazing glow and the cold stone. The rich scent of burnt wood and oxidized iron hangs in the air, mixed now with the fainter, earthy smell of damp soil drying under the late afternoon sun. You bend down slightly, careful not to disturb the ash, which holds residual warmth against your fingertips. The texture is fine and powdery, a testament to countless hours of combustion, each speck carrying memory. The sharpness of new kindling, the density of old charcoal, the metallic tang of worked steel. You think about time in this manner. Time here seems less like a measured breath ticking forward and more like the slow settling of soot upon a stone wall. It accumulates gently over countless days of heat and labor, building depth rather than drama. The cycle of burning things down only to rebuild them is written into the very ground you stand on, into the rhythm of this village itself. You rise slowly, stretching your shoulders until the knots that formed there from hammering loosen, just a fraction. Your attention draws to the pile of spent charcoal and cooled metal scrap near the edge of the work area. They are remnants, objects that have given their potential energy freely to fire and hammer stroke. You use a wooden spade, its handle smoothed by decades of handling, to organize them. The pieces of scrap iron, unevenly shaped blooms, scraps of plowshare tang, are heavy things, solid with absorbed history. As you sort them, you are organizing not merely metal, but the scattered moments of your day's craft. The act feels meditative, a slow physical sorting that matches the internal quietude settling within you. You notice how different types of metal respond to this handling. Some pieces are brittle and flaky, suggesting an early failure or weak bond. Others retain a solid, dependable weight, holding their shape as if remembering their intended purpose. This variety brings a subtle echo of your own craft, the potential in the raw ore versus the reliable endurance of the finished tool. Turning slightly away from the immediate workspace, you find yourself drawn by the cooler stones bordering the village path that runs past the forge. The late sun casts long, elongated shadows across the packed earth and cobblestones, deepening the sense of peace. You walk a few paces, allowing your mind to follow the slow, rhythmic scrape of your worn leather sandals against the uneven ground. Each footfall is small, measured, grounding you in the present moment, far from the intensity of the blazing coals. You pause by a low, smooth wall built of local granite. You run your hand over the stone surface. It is cool to the touch, holding the day's dampness like a promise. The rock feels permanent, indifferent to the heat and cold cycles that define your labor. Unlike the malleable, temperamental metal, this stone simply exists, having seen generations pass by in whispers of passing feet. This stark contrast, the brilliant volatility of iron against the cool, stoic endurance of granite, presents a quiet lesson. You reflect on how existence itself seems to be a blend of both, moments of intense, necessary flare the fire, followed by long stretches of patient settling and permanence, the stone. The life lived between these two poles is perhaps where true strength resides. You remember the simple philosophy often whispered among men whose lives are dictated by raw elements. It speaks not of fighting the heat or battling the cold, but of finding the steady rhythm within the transition itself. like the water that flows past you on its careful path to the stream. Life requires yielding and persistence in equal measure. The shift brings a slightly different sensory focus. You turn your attention toward the nearest trough fed by a small side stream, the cleanest running water available near the village cluster of dwellings. The sound is utterly absorbing, the consistent murmur of cold, clear liquid rushing over smooth river stones. This audible repetition acts like a natural balm on the frayed edges of your awareness. You approach the edge of the stream. The air here is markedly cooler, carrying the pure scent of mineral-rich water and wet moss. You dip your hands into the current. The immediate shock of the cold liquid against your skin is sharp, invigorating, stripping away the lingering warmth and sooty residue of the forge. The cool rush grounds you entirely. You observe the movement of the water. It does not hesitate. It moves over obstacles, around roots, and continually renews its surface, never seeming to exhaust itself despite continuous flow. This steady, unwavering motion becomes a quiet philosophical counterpart to your own labor. The blacksmith's craft requires understanding resistance, the stubborn yielding of hot iron, but survival requires adopting the river's grace, constant adaptation without losing direction. You draw your hands back, inspecting them. They appear cleaner, stripped bare not just of grit, but perhaps of some lingering mental tension. This small ritual is more than cleaning. It is a resetting of sensory focus, allowing the calming logic of liquid flow to wash away the memory of violent heat and percussive impact. Having steadied your senses with the pure cold, you turn back toward the shelter of your own dwelling, leaving the river's steady song behind you. The deeper gold of the late afternoon is now beginning its inevitable retreat toward the rich blues and purples of twilight. As you walk those final steps towards the comparative safety of wood and thatch, carrying the memory of the stream's chill on your skin and the deep reflection of the embers in your mind, you feel a settling weight settle over you, a quiet preparation for the long evening hours ahead, finding rest not through cessation of labor, but through mindful observation of slowing down. The light outside has softened considerably, losing the hard edges it held at midday. It is that time when the deep amber of late afternoon bleeds into a quieter, more muted grayness. You move slowly from your workshop towards the heart of the village, feeling the accumulated weariness in your muscles, not a sharp ache, but the pervasive weight of a long day's labor settled deep within the bone. The sounds that surround you are no longer the sudden pops and hisses of cooling metal, but softer rhythms. The dull thud of wooden sandals on packed earth, the occasional bleating of a goat, or the low murmur of voices passing in small clusters. You settle into your own home, the door closing behind you with a satisfying, heavy thunk that seals out the outside world. The air inside is different from the forge. It carries the mingled scents of old wool, banked peat smoke, and wood smoke mixed with the subtle, rich odor of cooking roots and grains. The small space becomes centered around the hearth and a long, sturdy table. It is time for the evening meal. The preparation itself is a calming ceremony. You take up the shallow wooden bowl and scoop out remnants from last night's stores, a mix of dried oats mixed with pounded barley, and perhaps some preserved greens that have been pickled in brine. The movement is methodical, unhurried. You are not preparing for hunger so much as you are following a deep, structural habit, a ritual marking the end of labor. The table space feels worn smooth by generations of meals. The wood grain tells silent stories of scraped elbows and hurried hands. When the simple meal is laid out, the bowl steaming slightly with rendered fat, the rough linen cloth covering the implements, you settle near it. The light source is gentle, coming from a single tallow candle that casts a warm, flickering circle on the adjacent wall. This artificial glow has a different quality than sunlight. It is contained, immediate, and seems to absorb all noise. The first moments of eating are marked by observation. You lift your simple wooden bowl, its surface cool against your palms. The aroma rising from the food is earthy, deep, the scent of slow-cooked sustenance. As you begin to eat, the pace becomes one of profound deceleration. Each bite requires a conscious moment of stillness before swallowing, allowing the warmth and the flavors to register fully. The sounds surrounding this meal are surprisingly minimal. There is the faint, rhythmic clink as another bowl is set down across the table, the soft scratch of someone using a spoon against ceramic or wood. You notice your own breathing, a slow, deep inhalation that travels down and out again with noticeable ease, a counterpoint to the sounds of others. Your family or neighbors are gathered around you, settled into their familiar chairs or benches. There is no need for grand conversation. The day's events, if they were to be mentioned, would be too thin and dispersed to hold the attention. Instead, the focus rests upon shared silence, a deep, communal quietude that does not feel empty but rather full. It is a silence built from mutual acknowledgement, the shared knowledge of labor completed, of survival maintained for one more night. You might pick up a piece of rough-spun bread and break it slowly into smaller pieces between your fingers. You watch how the fine dust of flour adheres to your calloused skin, contrasting with the deep ochre stains ingrained under your fingernails from working iron. The act is quiet, almost delicate, making such ordinary materials seem highly valuable in this moment of repose. Reflection drifts into the nature of time itself. Unlike the rapid, measurable passage of work, the seconds between striking the bellows or the hammer blow against hot metal, this silence stretches time taut. You notice how the small fluctuations in candlelight create moving shadows on the walls. The rhythmic crawl of those shadows is a slow clock, more reliable than any spring-mounted mechanism. These patterns remind you that life proceeds not by minutes ticked off, but by cycles. The rise and fall of the sun, the darkening of the tallow, the eventual stillness of the hearth. The talk, when it comes, is gentle and observational. Perhaps someone remarks on how heavy the morning dew was upon the leaves outside, or how unusually persistent the clouds have been that week. These are not dramatic stories of great deeds, but factual anchors to the reality immediately surrounding you. Listening to these small statements gives structure back to the day's diffuse energy. After the meal slows and your stomach settles into a deep fullness, the true essence of the evening begins to emerge, the shared stillness. You might observe the interplay of light and shadow in the hearth corner. The glowing embers are no longer actively radiating heat. They have reached a profound state of banked warmth, a gentle assurance of comfort yet to come. This is similar to the cooling core of your forge, an energy that has been spent but retains its deep potential. The sounds fade almost entirely. The occasional shifting of clothing fabric against wood, the soft, settling creak of the house timbers as the temperature differential between inside and out continues its nightly adjustment. These are the subtle sonic details of dwelling. You feel the weight of your own body sinking into the wooden bench, the satisfying ache in your neck from sitting for a sustained period. It is the feeling of being perfectly situated within your lived space. There are no immediate plans discussed for tomorrow, only quiet acknowledgments of routine. The simple reality that you will wake, gather water, and the cycle will repeat offers a deep, reassuring comfort. This realization, the enduring pattern beneath the changing weather and the fleeting lives of the village community, is profound. It ties back to the iron itself. Though it is repeatedly hammered into new shapes, the fundamental nature of the ore remains constant. You rest upon that same stability. As you slowly gather your own wooden bowl and rise from the table, you feel a wash of gratitude for this moment of uncomplicated togetherness. The quiet meal has done more than fill your stomach. It has calmed the edges of your mind, preparing you gently for the deep peace that awaits when the night finally pulls you towards sleep. The scent of wood smoke, though it has cooled considerably now, still clings to the woven wool of your tunic. You feel the evening chill rising from the packed earth underfoot as you pull yourself away from the warmth and contained smells of the settlement. The air has taken on a different weight than it had inside the dwelling. It is sharper, thinner, scented with damp leaf matter and the clean mineral scent of wet stone. You walk slowly toward the edge of the village cluster, drawn by an almost irresistible pull toward the open expanse. Every step feels deliberate, a gradual leaving of the structured order of human life for the vastness of the natural world. The sounds that accompany you are minimal, the soft crunch of your own worn leather boots on the gravel path, and perhaps the muted bleating of sheep grazing in a nearby copse. The darkness here is not merely the absence of light. It is a substantial presence, a blanket woven from deep blues and subtle blacks. Above you, the sky has opened into an immense dome. It feels impossibly high, pressing down with its weight, yet somehow also containing all potential peace. You lift your gaze upward, tilting your neck back until your head aches slightly, simply to absorb the view. The stars do not begin suddenly. They unfurl like a slow, majestic curtain rising upon an ancient stage. There is a depth to the black between them that seems to promise untold distances and deep silence. The Milky Way does not just shine. It spills across the zenith, a milky, ethereal stream of accumulated light that makes the darkness itself visible. It feels as if you could reach up and scoop handfuls of luminous dust from its wake. You stand still for a long moment, allowing the cold night air to settle over your shoulders. You notice the precise texture of the silence. It is not empty, but full, filled with the distant rush of unseen water, the chirping chorus that only continues after true dusk, and the gentle whistle of a cooling breeze passing through the eaves of the houses. Your ancestors knew this sky intimately. They read the patterns in its brilliance, weaving histories, fates, and divine pronouncements into the constellation's visible tapestry. You learn to trace shapes with your eyes, the familiar curve of the Great Bear, perhaps, or the distinct pointiness of a hunter's spear held aloft by some mythological figure. These ancient stories are not found in any scroll. They live here, woven directly into the geometry of space. You consider how much humanity has accumulated and diminished within this small patch of earth, yet nothing, not your careful hammering, nor the smoke from your chimney, nor the strength of your own arms, can diminish the scope or the indifference of this canopy. The stars were burning long before any man sharpened a tool, and they will shine long after all memory of man fades into dust. A gentle thought settles over you regarding time. On the forge, time is immediate. It is measured by the quick heat of a striking hammer, the burst of orange light, the rapid cooling that signals an end to effort. Here, under the vast spread of night, time loses its sharp edges. It becomes cyclical, immeasurably slow, stretching across epochs and ages. The raw power you wielded with iron, the potential energy compressed and released in a single strike, feels almost trivial against this cosmic backdrop. Instead, there is a quiet kind of strength here, the enduring stability that can exist without needing to prove itself through fire or force. You turn slightly, shifting your gaze from the infinite overhead to the immediate ground beneath you. You observe the transition zone, where the wild, untamed forest meets the cleared earth edge of the village. The shadows cast by nearby trees are deep and velvety, absorbing almost all light. Their roots run unseen beneath the grass, anchored into the bedrock, connecting them to a life force that is slow, persistent, and unhurried. This duality, the frantic, contained energy of human labor versus the vast, indifferent calm of stellar night, is profound. You recognize that your own existence falls neatly between these two extremes, bound by routine and necessity within the small circle of your home, yet simultaneously subject to the magnificent rhythms dictated by those same cold lights overhead. The simple act of standing here requires nothing more than breath. Inhale, feel the crisp coolness enter your lungs. Hold it for a count of 3. Exhale slowly, letting the tension ease from your neck and shoulders. This breathing becomes a meditative rhythm, mirroring the steady, unseen pulse of the night itself. You notice how subtle changes occur in the light. The occasional passing cloud momentarily dims a section of the galaxy, only for the stars to flare back into their accustomed brilliance. It is a constant dialogue between presence and temporary occlusion, much like the day's work, moments of intense focus broken by necessary pauses. The cold is persistent, not painful, but a steady reminder of your mortality and your place within this elemental system. You realize that every object you interacted with today, the damp wood handles, the grit on your boots, the smoke stains on your clothes, is transient. It will weather, decay, or be repurposed into something new. The journey back to the warmth must now begin. Your initial state of detached philosophical wonder gently gives way to a comfortable weariness. The magnificent spectacle overhead is beautiful, yes, but its sheer scale demands a slowing down that eventually translates into a deeper need for physical enclosure and quiet respite. You pivot away from the open sky and start walking back toward the gentle glow emanating from your own hearth. Your boots repeat their rhythmic crunching sound on the path. You pass by neighbors who have also wandered out, perhaps 2 or 3 other figures moving with similar unhurried gait. These moments are marked not by conversation, but by shared acknowledgement, a quiet dipping of the head or a brief nod that conveys, "We are together in this stillness, sharing the same vast blanket above us." As you approach the threshold of your dwelling, the shift is palpable. The outside chill remains clinging to your clothes, but it meets the gradual release of warmth from the timbers and the low, constant smell of settled ash. You lift a hand, brushing away the final remnants of starlight dust or floating leaf debris from the edge of your tunic sleeve. This small, intimate gesture marks the return from the cosmos back into the safety and contained rhythm of hearth and home. The night holds you now, settling down with the quiet assurance of something immense that has always been there, waiting only for you to pause and look up. You turn your back on the dying glow of the forge, leaving the persistent scent of hot carbon and spent charcoal behind you. The intense warmth that had enveloped you throughout the day begins to retreat with the deepening twilight, pulling the edge of the day's effort from your bones. A heavy stillness settles over the village lanes as the last shadows stretch long between the clustered timber houses. Each step now carries a different quality than it did when you first woke. There is a weight to the fatigue that settles not just in your limbs, but deep within the joints of your memory. You walk slowly toward your own dwelling, moving away from the centralized hub of activity where the forge stands. You notice how the dirt on the packed earth of the path changes color as the last direct light fails. The red-brown clay gives way to a cooler, slate gray under the deepening sky. The air itself feels different now, cleansed by the day's accumulated heat and cooled slightly by the approaching night dampness. Your hands are coated in a fine mixture of soot and residue from handling iron, a dark film that seems permanent against your skin. These hands, capable of shaping life-giving tools from stubborn metal, now feel cumbersome, rough, and alien to their owner. You reach for the shallow basin set near the entrance of your longhouse, drawing clean water from a bucket placed just within easy reach. The water is cool, carrying the chill absorbed from the earth and the evening dew. You immerse your hands into the basin. The cold is immediate and profound, a sharp shock that travels up to your wrists. You watch the dirtiest particles, the metallic dust, the carbon flakes, the stubborn grime of sweat mixed with smoke, lift away in miniature currents within the flowing water. It is not merely cleaning, it feels like an erasure. With each scrub, you are shedding the day's residue, attempting to cleanse the physical evidence of your labor so that your skin can settle back into a state of quiet rest. You move onto your face and neck, running your fingers under cool streams of water. The scent of wet earth, mixed with the sharp minerality of the stream, begins to counteract the persistent, acrid smell of smoke clinging to your clothing. You look at your forearms in the dim light. They seem less stained now, the color returning a little closer to natural flesh tone. The meticulous act of cleansing is meditative, forcing your focus onto simple tactile sensations. The temperature gradient from the cool water to your warmer skin, the smooth drag of wet linen against rough wood. Inside, you shed your work clothes slowly. The heavy leather apron, stained in countless patches with oil and rust-brown dust, feels like a shell that has done its duty. You carefully fold it over a low wooden bench, noting how easily the grime settles into the creases of the stiffened material. Next are your rough wool tunic and breeches. These garments have absorbed not only sweat, but also the particulate memory of the forge. Microscopic specks of carbon clinging to every thread. Removing them feels less like undressing and more like extracting layers of a hard-won day. You breathe deeply, inhaling the scent of clean cedar wood mixed with your own slightly damp body heat, a smell vastly different from the sharp, hot tang of the furnace. The transition from the open space to the interior of the dwelling is marked by an immediate shift in temperature and light intensity. Outside, the evening air is still cool. Inside, a gentle pocket of residual warmth remains near the hearth or banked coals, smelling faintly of last night's firewood. You move with a greater slowness now, each step weighted by fatigue that has settled deep into your bone marrow. The muscles ache, not sharply, but with the pervasive soreness that speaks of continuous tension and effort throughout the hours. There is a quiet rhythm to these final movements, the careful setting down of tools on wooden hooks, the methodical stacking of kindling near the fire pit, the settling back into the worn structure of your own simple bed. These are actions without ceremony, yet they hold profound meaning in their routine nature. They speak to an order that persists regardless of the monumental events outside a man's life. You notice the details of the interior architecture, the smooth curve of the curved roof beams overhead, the deep grain patterns on the planking of the walls, and the way the tallow candlelight catches the dust motes suspended lazily in the cool evening air. These enclosed spaces provide a sanctuary from the raw forces that define your labor, the unpredictable heat of the fire, the cold resistance of the stone anvil, the damp chill of the stream. The house is constant. It simply accepts and contains your existence for another night. Lying down at last, you take a final moment before sleep claims you. Your body settles against the woven straw mattress, the rough texture providing a reassuring anchor point. You close your eyes, not to escape thought, but to let the accumulated sensory data of the day recede into stillness. You recall the overwhelming quality of the fire's heat hours ago, the sweat stinging your eyes, the rhythmic push and pull of the bellows, the blinding flash when glowing metal was drawn forth. This memory is intense, active. Then you contrast it with the current sensation, the gentle coolness radiating through the floorboards, the subtle crackle of a few dying embers in the hearth that has been banked for the night, the muted sound of your own breathing returning to an even, deep cadence. The world, so full of sharp edges and volatile forces during the day, settles into a pervasive softness now, promising a deep and undisturbed rest that will gather you strength for the repetitive cycle